You think respect is earned, it's seized. Every challenge exposes weakness. If you don't dominate fast, you're remarked, replaced, and quietly erased. The problem started long before anyone challenged you. It started the moment you accepted rules that were never meant to protect men who intend to hold ground. You were conditioned to wait, to explain, to assume good faith, to believe restraint would be interpreted as strength. That conditioning works only in artificial environments where hierarchy is denied. The real world doesn't deny hierarchy, it runs on it. Status is not a reward. It is not a reflection of effort, intention, or intelligence. It is a position enforced through consequence. When you forget that, confusion follows. You start doing everything right and still feel something slipping. People interrupt you more. Push boundaries casually. Speak to you with less care. None of this is accidental. It is the system updating its assessment of you. Every challenge is a measurement. Not an emotional moment. Not disrespect. A measurement. The human brain tests authority automatically, the way pressure tests a weak structure. It starts small because small tests are cheap. A remark. A joke. A disagreement in front of others. The brain is asking one thing: what happens if I do this? If nothing happens, the answer is recorded. Men fail because they misread this moment. They think responding calmly, explaining intentions, or letting it slide shows maturity. It doesn't. It shows that pressure applied to you produces absorption, not resistance. Absorption invites escalation, not because people are evil, but because systems move toward efficiency. If pushing you costs nothing, pushing you becomes logical. You were told restraint equals confidence. Silence equals strength. Turning the other cheek equals superiority. That belief is conditional. It only works when dominance is already established and unquestioned. Without that foundation, restraint is read as fear. Silence becomes absence, and absence is filled quickly. Groups do not admire men who quietly endure pressure. They root around them. Goodness is not a shield. It is exposure. Morality without enforcement is a signal that you will carry the cost so others don't have to. Once that signal is sent, the environment adjusts its behavior toward you. More demands, less respect, more testing. This isn't cruelty, it's adaptation. Explanations accelerate the process. The moment you explain yourself, you collapse the hierarchy into equality. You imply the challenger's perception deserves negotiation. Authority does not negotiate its existence, it acts. Others adapt. Only afterward do they rationalize why the outcome made sense. This is why intelligent men often lose status faster than blunt ones. Intelligence wants clarity, nuance, shared understanding. Hierarchies don't operate on truth, operate on perception. And perception responds to decisiveness, speed, and consequence, not logic. Every environment runs an invisible scoreboard. People track who enforces boundaries, who hesitates, who can be interrupted, who cannot. This tracking is constant and unconscious. You do not opt out by ignoring it. You only lose control over how you are ranked. When you fail to respond decisively to pressure, you don't preserve peace. You update the system against yourself. Observers notice without realizing they are noticing. They recalibrate. Next time they push sooner, harder, louder. What you later call disrespect was permission granted earlier. The most dangerous part is how quiet this process is. There is no alert, no warning. One day you realize people talk over you. Decisions happen without you. Your presence no longer alters behavior. By then, the internal decision has already been made. You are tolerated, not deferred to. Men protect their self-image here. They tell themselves they are patient, professional, above petty power struggles. That self-image feels noble. It is also fatal. Hierarchy does not care who you believe you are. It responds only to what happens when pressure is applied. Once you understand this, the frame shifts. Challenges stop feeling personal. They become structural data, measurements, inputs. Every response trains the environment how to treat you next time. Early action matters more than perfect action. Consistency matters more than intensity. This is not about aggression. Aggression is noisy and insecure. This is about removing ambiguity. About making it clear, without explanation, that pressure applied to you produces friction. That testing you is inefficient. That boundaries exist whether spoken or not. The man who understands this doesn't need to dominate constantly. He doesn't need volume. His presence carries weight because the system has already learned the cost of misalignment. And once that lesson is installed, challenges fade. Not because people respect you more, but because challenging you no longer seems worth it. Once you understand that challenges are measurements, the next mistake is assuming they come from emotion. They don't. They come from wiring. The human brain is built to locate hierarchy the way animals locate threat. It scans constantly, unconsciously, looking for certainty. Where certainty exists, it relaxes. Where uncertainty appears, it probes. A challenge is not anger, it's curiosity with intent. People test because the brain hates ambiguity. When your position is unclear, the system applies pressure to clarify it. This happens without planning, without malice, without narrative. A person may believe they are just joking or just being honest, but the deeper mechanism doesn't care about their story. It cares about feedback. Pressure goes in. Response comes out. The brain records the result. This is why challenges feel sudden to you but natural to them. The more ambiguous your reactions are, the more testing you attract. Inconsistency is the strongest invitation. One day you enforce a boundary. The next day you let it slide. The brain cannot map you, so it keeps pushing until a stable rule emerges. Stability ends testing. Ambiguity multiplies it. Here is the brutal reality: most men resist people don't challenge strength. They challenge uncertainty. A man who is predictably firm is safer to be around than a man who is unpredictably nice. Safety, in human terms, means knowing what happens when lines are crossed. Not hoping they won't be. This is why dominance is quiet when it's real. The work was done early. The cost was established once. After that, the system self-regulates. People adjust their behavior before acting. They don't need reminders. They remember outcomes. Challenges escalate only when early signals fail. Another miscalculation is assuming intent matters. It doesn't. Whether the challenger is insecure, ambitious, bored, resentful, or unaware is irrelevant. The brain doesn't respond to intention, it responds to outcome. If pushing you produces advantage, the behavior continues. If it produces friction, it stops. This is also why appealing to fairness fails. Fairness assumes shared values. Hierarchy assumes competing interests. When pressure appears, values dissolve. Outcomes decide. Public challenges are especially dangerous because the audience is the multiplier. The challenger may be testing you, but observers are testing reality. They are watching what happens when someone crosses you. Your response doesn't just train one person, it trains the room. Silence in public doesn't signal maturity. It signals that your authority is negotiable. And once authority is seen as negotiable, it becomes negotiable everywhere. The brain of the group updates fast, faster than language, faster than logic. Tone, posture, timing, decisiveness, these signals register instantly. You can say the right words and still lose ground if your delivery communicates hesitation. This is why clever men get undermined. They answer content while the threat exists in subtext. Subtext is where hierarchy lives. Challenges are often disguised because open confrontation is expensive, so the system uses deniable forms: humor, concern, advice, questions. Just saying, these are low-risk probes. If you defend or explain, the probe succeeds without cost. Data is gained. Behavior adjusts. Once data exists, the brain doesn't forget. This is where many men make a fatal delay. They wait for hostility before responding. They want proof. By the time hostility appears, the hierarchy has already shifted. Status loss happens quietly first, then loudly later. What you experience as a sudden collapse was a slow erosion you didn't recognize. Another illusion to kill you cannot opt out of this by being detached. Detachment without authority is interpreted as irrelevance. The system roots around you. Decisions happen elsewhere. Influence relocates. You remain present but ineffective. Understanding this mechanism removes emotion from the equation. You stop feeling insulted. You stop feeling confused. You stop asking why people are like this. You see the machine. And once you see the machine, you stop reacting to noise and start responding to structure. You don't need to intimidate. You don't need to perform dominance. You need clarity, predictability, consequence. When those exist, the brain of the group relaxes. Testing fades, order returns, not because people are good, because systems prefer efficiency. Not every challenge comes from the same place, and treating them as if they do is how men misfire. Power is not volume or anger. It's pattern recognition. If you can't read the type of pressure being applied, you will respond with the wrong tool and train the environment against yourself. Some people test to climb. They see hierarchy as a ladder and you as a step. Their pressure is calculated, rarely emotional. They prefer public moments because witnesses are leverage. If you hesitate, they don't celebrate. They advance. These people don't hate you. They don't respect you either. Respect only appears when resistance is immediate and costly. Anything softer is interpreted as clearance. Others hide the test inside humor, sarcasm, playful disrespect, just joking. Laughter is their camouflage. The mistake men make here is confusing likability with safety. Humor lowers defenses, which is exactly why it's used. If you laugh along, you accept the frame you are, safe to diminish. The room learns it instantly. The joke gains height by lowering you one notch at a time. Then there are those who weaponize values. They imply you're unfair, aggressive, insensitive, or unethical. Their pressure sounds moral, but the goal is not justice. It's leverage. If you defend your intentions, you lose. Intention is irrelevant. Once you are arguing morality, you've accepted their frame and surrendered position. Authority does not plead its goodness. It enforces boundaries and lets others judge in silence. Some pressure comes from people who were once close. Access breeds entitlement. Tolerance becomes expectation. Gratitude decays into resentment. Their challenge is really loud, it's passive resistance delays, selective compliance, quiet defiance. Men misread this as stress or misunderstanding. It's not. It's an attempt to renegotiate hierarchy without open conflict. If uncorrected, it spreads. There are also those who don't want your position at all. They want disorder. Rules suffocate them. Structure limits them. They challenge for the sake of friction. Ignoring them doesn't neutralize them. It empowers them. Chaos expands wherever boundaries dissolve. These situations don't require discussion. They require containment or removal. Delay only increases the blast radius. The most dangerous type doesn't challenge you directly. He watches. He observes how you respond to others. He decides where to align based on outcomes, not promises. Every boundary you fail to enforce recruits him away from you. Every decisive response buys his loyalty without a word being exchanged. Men lose influence here without realizing anything happened. Here is the critical truth: challengers do not need to win to weaken you. They only need you to respond incorrectly once. Status erosion is cumulative. One misread situation becomes precedent. Precedent becomes expectation. Expectation becomes permission. Most men default to the same response for all pressure: explanation. They explain to climbers, joke with jokers, debate moralists, tolerate the entitled, ignore chaos, and forget the observers entirely. This is why their authority feels unstable. They are fighting different threats with the same blunt tool. Dominant men don't do this. They adjust response to pattern, not emotion. They don't get angry at climbers. They don't entertain jokers. They don't justify themselves to moralists. They don't negotiate with entitlement. They don't indulge chaos. And they always respond with the audience in mind. The environment is always watching, even when it pretends not to be. This is where most men misunderstand control. They think power is about asserting themselves in the moment. It isn't. It's about shaping expectation over time. Once people know what happens when they test you, most never try. The work is front-loaded. The calm comes later. Seeing patterns removes confusion. Challenges stop feeling random or personal. They become predictable movements inside a system that rewards efficiency. Predictability gives you leverage. Leverage gives you calm. You stop asking why people behave this way. You stop reacting to tone. You stop mistaking intent for impact. You see what's happening, classify it instantly, and respond in a way that ends the behavior rather than feeds it. That shift is the difference between being inside the game and controlling the board. Weakness never stays private. The moment it appears, it becomes information. And information spreads faster than intention ever could. One unchallenged test does not end as a single incident, it becomes a reference point. People don't need to talk about it. They feel it. And once felt, behavior changes automatically. This is how authority collapses without drama. It always begins small. A line crossed that you let pass. A public comment you chose not to address. An interruption you ignored because you didn't want to seem reactive. In your mind, you were being strategic, patient, above it. In the system's mind, a variable was updated. Pressure applied here produces no resistance. That update never stays isolated. Others observe without realizing they are observing. The human brain is designed to monitor risk and opportunity at all times. When someone crosses you and nothing happens, the brain flags it as safe terrain. Safe terrain invites movement. More people step there. Louder. With less caution. What you experience later as everyone suddenly disrespecting me is not sudden at all. It's delayed awareness. Escalation follows a predictable path. First comes deniable pressure, humor, questions, suggestions, then repetition. The same behavior appears again, slightly stronger. Then amplification. Public settings, witnesses, tone shifts, finally replacement. Someone else begins shaping decisions while you still technically hold the role. By the time most men react, the hierarchy has already moved. Any attempt to assert control now feels unnatural to the group. Out of character. Aggressive. The environment resists not because you're wrong, but because you waited too long. Strength delayed looks like instability. Human nature punishes late force more harshly than early correction. History is full of this pattern. Systems don't fall because of one threat. They fall because early threats were tolerated, negotiated with, explained away. What was once unthinkable becomes acceptable. What was acceptable becomes expected. And what is expected becomes demanded. This isn't morality. It's momentum. Another layer most men underestimate is the role of observers. Challengers gain by testing you. Observers gain by aligning with strength. When you fail to respond decisively, observers don't sympathize. They distance themselves. Silence turns into quiet withdrawal. Loyalty erodes long before open defiance appears. That's why reputational collapse feels brutal. It isn't the fall that hurts. It's realizing you were alone long before you noticed. Appeals to fairness fail here because fairness assumes shared values. Escalation assumes competing interests. Once pressure goes public, values dissolve. Only outcomes matter. The group doesn't ask whether you were right. It asks whether you were effective. Men sabotage themselves by clinging to self-image. That's not who I am. I don't want to be that guy. I'll deal with it later. These thoughts are comforting and lethal. The system does not care about your identity narrative. It cares about consistency. About what happens when lines are crossed. Every delay increases the cost of correction. Early responses are quiet, almost invisible. Late responses are loud, disruptive, and often resisted. This is why dominant men appear calm. Not because they tolerate more, but because they act earlier, before emotion enters the system. There is also a brutal truth: most avoid groups punish weakness more aggressively than cruelty. Weak leaders create uncertainty. Uncertainty creates risk. Risk triggers removal. This wiring is ancient. It has nothing to do with modern values. It exists because survival demanded it. When you fail to enforce boundaries, you don't create peace. You create a vacuum. Vacuums are always filled by louder voices, stronger wills, less restrained actors. You may still be present, but influence has moved elsewhere. This is why ignoring pressure never works. Pressure does not dissolve. It accumulates. It waits. And when it resurfaces, it does so with interest. Once you understand this, indecision becomes impossible. Not because you want conflict, but because you see the cost of delay clearly. You realize that every moment you hesitate, someone else is learning how far they can go, and learning never stops. Escalation is not chaos, it's structure playing out, predictable, relentless, and always favoring the man who acts early, cleanly, and without explanation. Control is not about winning exchanges, it's about ending them. The moment you understand that, your behavior changes. You stop trying to sound right. You stop trying to be understood. You stop trying to manage emotions here's or theirs. You focus on outcomes. What changes in the environment after pressure is applied to you? If nothing changes, you failed. The first rule is speed, not recklessness. Speed. Decisiveness beats correctness every time. A fast response signals certainty, and certainty collapses challenges before they gather momentum. Delay gives challengers time to reinterpret, escalate, or recruit witnesses. Once momentum shifts away from you, reclaiming it costs 10 times more force. Early action is quiet. Late action is violent. The second rule is compression. Say less. To less take more space. Long explanations leak authority. They suggest insecurity, negotiation, and doubt. Short responses force others to adapt. Power communicates in reductions. When you feel the urge to clarify that urge itself is the weakness trying to survive. Never address the content of the challenge. Content is bait. Address the behavior. Content pulls you into debate. Behavior reasserts hierarchy. When someone crosses a line, the violation is not what they said, it's that they said it in that way, at that time, to you. Treat it accordingly, calmly, publicly, without justification. The environment learns faster than the individual ever will. Asymmetry is critical. Do not match energy. Matching energy equalizes status. If they joke, you don't joke back. If they question, you don't explain. If they escalate emotionally, you stay flat. Dominance requires mismatch. Your control exposes their movement. Their movement makes them visible. Consequence matters more than confrontation. Punishment is emotional. Consequence is structural. Access reduced, attention withdrawn, privileges removed, opportunities closed. People don't change because they are told to. They change because reality changes. When outcomes shift, behavior follows automatically. Never chase agreement. Agreement seeking is submission dressed up as diplomacy. You don't need consensus to enforce reality. You need consistency. Once people realize your responses are predictable and costly to test, most challenges disappear without effort. Unpredictability invites probing. Consistency ends it. Learn selective enforcement. Not every comment deserves a response. Noise is not threat, patterns are. Respond to repetition, not to one-offs. Respond to public tests, not private opinions. This signals intelligence, not volatility. Overreaction makes you look unstable. Underreaction makes you look weak. Precision is what builds authority. Your internal posture matters more than technique. If you are acting from fear of losing approval, every move will betray you. Control comes from indifference too, validation. When approval no longer drives you, your responses become clean, efficient, unemotional. That is what the system respects. Do not explain your rules, enforce them. Rules that need explanation are suggestions. Rules that are enforced become reality. The fewer words you use, the more weight each one carries. Silence, when backed by consequence, becomes threatening. Silence without consequence is nothing. Expect resistance when you change behavior. People who benefited from your old tolerance will test harder. This is not failure. It is confirmation. Hold the line without escalation. Let the environment update. Most will adjust. Some will remove themselves. That is acceptable. Control always costs access. Understand this clearly. Authority compounds. The first clean enforcement makes the second easier. The second makes the third almost unnecessary. Men who struggle here are not incapable. They are late. They allowed the environment to train them instead of training the environment. You do not need to be loud. You do not need to intimidate. You do not need to perform dominance. You need to be unavoidable. Pressure applied to you must meet friction every time, calmly, predictably, without drama. When that becomes consistent, control stops requiring effort. The system regulates itself. People check themselves before acting. Tests fade. Space opens around you. That is when power becomes quiet. You cannot carry the old version of yourself into a position that requires authority. That version was built for approval, safety, and inclusion. It learned to survive by being agreeable, by smoothing tension, by avoiding friction. That identity worked when your role was to fit in. It fails the moment your role is to hold ground. This is where most men collapse. Not at the level of tactics, but at the level of self, loyalty. You keep protecting an identity that is incompatible with power. You want to be respected without being resented, firm without being feared, in control without being seen as controlling. That desire is the chain. Authority requires trade-offs, and the first trade is comfort for sovereignty. The old identity needs validation. It wants to be liked. It wants others to understand its intentions. It feels tension as danger. That reflex is poison. The environment reads it instantly. The moment your behavior changes under pressure, your position becomes negotiable. Authority begins when your behavior stops shifting to manage perception. This does not mean hostility. It means indifference, calm without warmth, presence without explanation. You stop advertising who you are and start letting consequences speak. People no longer feel invited to interpret you. They calculate around you. This transition feels uncomfortable because it removes emotional rewards, fewer smiles, less casual friendliness, less reassurance that you're a good guy. In exchange, you gain space, pauses when you speak, people adjusting tone mid-sentence, decisions slowing until you react. That is not distance, that is altitude. Many men mislabel this as loneliness. It isn't. It is separation by role. At higher positions in any hierarchy, interaction thins out. Words matter more. Errors cost more. Access becomes selective. That is the price of authority. If you are uncomfortable with that price, you will unconsciously sabotage your position to regain familiarity. This is why identity death is necessary. You must kill the reflex to soften yourself, the reflex to clarify, the reflex to justify, the reflex to prove you are fair, reasonable, or misunderstood. Those reflexes were survival tools at a lower level. At higher levels, they signal weakness. When you stop feeding those reflexes, resistance appears. Not from everyone. From specific people. The ones who benefited from your old self. The ones who had access, leverage, or influence because you tolerated more than you should have. When you change, they feel the loss immediately. They test harder. They frame you as different. Cold, changed. They are correct. Do not correct them. Let them adjust or leave. Authority always reduces access. Anyone who requires unlimited access to remain loyal was never loyal. They were positioned. Another internal shift is accepting that some people will never understand you aren't. You no longer need them to. Being understood is not the same as being effective. In fact, effectiveness often creates misunderstanding. The need to be seen accurately is a weakness in environments governed by power. Your concern is no longer how you appear, but what your presence allows. What behaviors emerge around you. What behaviors disappear. That is the only metric that matters. This is also where consistency becomes non-negotiable. Authority is fragile during transition. If you revert under pressure even once, the environment tests twice as hard next time. Identity replacement requires repetition. You must respond the same way when tired, stressed, bored, or watched. That sameness is what retrains the system. Over time, something shifts. You stop feeling the urge to intervene constantly. Not because you care less, but because fewer interventions are required. People self-correct. Silence becomes loaded. Your absence from a conversation carries more weight than your participation once did. This is the moment most men misunderstand power. They think they have become harsh. They haven't. They have become clear. The environment no longer wastes energy testing what it already knows. The old identity wanted to be safe. The new one is safe because it is respected. Once the replacement is complete, control no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment. The world moves around you instead of through you. And at that point, you stop asking who you need to be. You decide what you allow. That is authority. Selection never stops. That is the final reality most men refuse to face. There is no moment where hierarchy freezes and declares you safe. No level where respect becomes permanent. Every environment continuously updates its assessment based on behavior under pressure. You are always being measured, even when nothing is being said. Especially then. The danger is not open defiance. Open defiance is obvious and cheap to correct. The real danger is bypass. The moment people stop checking your reaction before acting. The moment decisions happen without waiting for your presence. The moment your silence no longer creates tension. That is not peace. That is irrelevance. By the time you notice it, it's already over. Most men think power is about controlling others. It isn't. It's about controlling yourself while being watched. The man who becomes cautious, emotional, or inconsistent under observation signals weakness instantly. The man whose behavior remains unchanged and becomes the reference point others adjust around. That is why power looks boring from the outside. The drama already died. Men want rules, ethical clearance, situations where dominance is justified. They want permission before enforcing boundaries. That hesitation is the last chain. Reality does not wait for moral alignment. Pressure appears when it's inconvenient, public, and deniable. If you require perfect conditions to act, you will never act. You will be tested when you are tired, when witnesses are present, when the challenger has plausible innocence, when responding risks making you look too much. These moments are not accidents. They are filters. They separate men who hold position from men who occupy it temporarily. Every time you let something slide to protect your self-image, the environment learns that image matters more to you than control. And once that lesson is learned, testing intensifies. Not immediately, gradually, quite with interest. There is no neutral response. Every reaction teaches something. Even inaction is instruction. Elite men understand this early. They don't live in reaction. They live in enforcement. They set the cost of friction once, then let the system run. They are not cruel. They are consistent. Consistency is what the human brain respects most because it reduces uncertainty. This is where most men misjudge the price of authority. They think the cost is aggression or conflict. It isn't. The real cost is loss of comfort, loss of emotional rewards, loss of being seen as harmless. Authority requires you to be misinterpreted by those who benefited from your old tolerance. That is unavoidable. Some people will withdraw. Others will frame you as cold, distant, or changed. They are reacting to loss of access, not loss of fairness. Do not negotiate this. Negotiation reopens the frame. Let the environment sort itself. It always does. Understand this clearly. The hierarchy does not care about your intentions, your past effort, or your internal struggle. It cares about what happens when pressure meets you. If pressure collapses you, you are replaced. If pressure bends around you, you remain. This is not cruelty. It is selection. Once you accept this, something inside you goes quiet. You stop looking for reassurance. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not entitled to explanation. You stop chasing validation from environments that only respect consequence. You also stop being surprised. Nothing feels personal anymore. Tests are expected. Resistance is anticipated. Silence is interpreted correctly. You no longer need to dominate situations because you already understand the mechanics running beneath them. At this point, control becomes maintenance, not effort. You don't move often. But when you do, movement matters. The environment adjusts quickly because it has learned the pattern. That learning is what power actually is. Not fear. Not admiration. Not loyalty. Predictable consequence. The man who survives selection long-term is not the loudest, smartest, or most moral. He is the one who understands that hierarchy is alive, watching, and indifferent. And instead of resenting that reality, he aligns with it. When you stop fighting the rules of selection and start operating within them, pressure stops feeling like threat. It becomes signal, data, confirmation. And that is when you stop asking whether you belong. The system already knows. You don't rise by being understood. You don't survive by being liked. You remain by being undeniable. If this pressure made you uncomfortable, it means it touched something real. Remember that. This is mind strict.